How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to, I think we're the second session as part of New Ventures BC. The topic is product market fit. So this is a little bit about me. So I'm Dave Thomas, that's how you can reach me. I'm a consultant with a consulting firm called Rocket Builders. We've been in the marketplace for about 12 years. We work with early stage technology companies mostly around go-to-market. How do I figure out who's going to buy my stuff and why? One of the things we do is we produce ready-to-rocket lists. In other words, we track a lot of the tech companies in the province. If you go to a website called Ready to Rocket, you'll see a number of the companies that have come through New Ventures BC in the past and have gone on to be success stories. Not necessarily anything to do with us, just we keep track of the companies that are doing well. Also, one of the things that you might find interesting is there are a series of venture finance events. The Angel Forum, Vantech Angel Network, a lot of the other different things. One of the bigger ones is the Canadian Financing Forum. It's in February of 2015, and one of the key components there is there's a boot camp the day before, which is more about how does financing work. And one of the topics here is to put together a sort of a finance plan for your company, and this one has some of the applied pieces in it. As well as being a consultant, I'm a shameless advertiser and marketer. I, as a hobby, run the sailing school at Jericho. So I don't know, who here knows how to sail? All right, a lot of very, very smart people and others who need to be educated. Okay, so we have, as I said, it's a sailing school for children and adults. We're also part of, actually now we're minor partners in 2 small sailing schools in China, just trying to understand the market and all the different things. I will use examples from the sailing school throughout the evening. One of the key components in some of the examples I use tonight is many of them are B2C examples, business to consumer. It's not to say that business to business is not important, but it's easier for a whole audience to often understand consumer brands and consumer products that everybody is familiar with. So we'll like to do that. So one question I have for everybody as we move on, how many of you are new media companies that are B2C? How about new media companies that are B2B or internet companies that are B2B? Clean tech. So we won't have any clean tech examples. How about advanced technology or engineering or stuff like that? All right. Anybody in the biotech or bioinformatics space? Okay, a little bit of that as well. Okay, great. So when we talk tonight, if you have a question at any time or you'd like to go through a specific example, more than welcome to do that. We're going to cover a series of topics, and they're all about finding the right fit in the marketplace for your product. There's a whole series of things we'll go through. A lot of them are understanding the market, and then at the second half is how do you communicate with the market, and then finally how do you figure out whether you're doing this correctly or not, which is all about metrics. And how do you measure the results of all the things you do. When you get into New Ventures BC, the important part is round 3. That's where they really start to get down to the final 25 companies. This session really will try to help you with those 6 questions. And they're all around what do you do when you go to the marketplace. So our learning objectives today, understanding how market research helps you. How does technology get adopted? And one of the things that's really important is we have very few clean tech or biotech companies here today. But the way the technology is adopted in the consumer marketplace versus in forestry versus in oil and gas versus in technology, heavy duty business to business and stuff is different. So you can go directly to the consumer on the internet. The game industry, like handheld games or video games that are online, are very good examples of that. In other industries and other vertical markets, quite often the value chain and all the players in the value chain are really important. So when we go through a lot of the things we talk about today, it may sound like I can do all these things and immediately talk to the customer. If you're in a distinct business-to-business market, it's really important to make sure you're paying attention to the value chain. And the lean startup model needs to be used differently in things like clean technology or sustainable energy, or in large equipment sort of industries where you have to build something big and test it for a long time. It's not the same as putting a product on the internet and figuring out whether you're succeeding in 2 weeks. All right, so we'll go through, as we said, how do things get adopted, go through some examples, and we'll understand, how do we do product positioning. And product positioning, how it influences all the messages in marketing materials. And what do I want to be? How do I want to present myself? And then finally, we'll take a look at pricing. And pricing is more and more a topic and more a part of how you present yourself to the marketplace and then understanding the analytics. It's going to take us a while to get there, but a quick question about product positioning. My wife drives a very safe car. What type of car does she drive? Okay, my wife is Swedish. She drives a Volvo because it's the national car. I don't think they're all that safe because they haven't won a safety award in 10 years. Everybody thinks they're safe. I just think that the spare parts are incredibly expensive. Okay, so positioning and perception and all those things may be different. All right, there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. So successful growth companies do a series of things. All right, you want to go into the marketplace and say, what do I need to build in order for people to say, yes, I'm interested in your product. I can use it. I want to buy it. So what's my minimum viable product? And that's a very important thing for an early stage company. If you've got 5 engineers and they're continually going, I think it should be, maybe more RAM or, bigger CPU or something like that, get over it, guys. Get it in the marketplace and figure it out pretty quick. What you really want to do is make sure that you have the product that is demanded by the marketplace and they'll actually pay you money. The great line at the Harvard Business School is, will the dog eat the dog food and will the dog pay you money for the dog food? And will they pay you more money than it costs you to produce it? You have to have all 3 of them as yes before you can make money. All right? So your addressable market with an engine of growth or a clearly defined niche market that has growth is really important. Who here has heard of a company called Hootsuite? Okay? What did they do at the very beginning? What was their, oops, don't like that. What was their very first product? What did it do? They now have a really neat product suite that does a lot of stuff. What was the very first thing they did? Yes?
Aggregator of social media?
So they did aggregate social media, but the first thing they did was they were very Twitter-centric. And it was all the tweets and all the other stuff around Twitter. Twitter, how many users does Twitter have today? 240 million or something? When they got started, there were 5 million people on Twitter. So it's gone from 5 to 240 million. They've had an amazing engine of growth where that's happened in 2 or 3 years. Okay, that's far better than being in the automotive industry in Detroit. Okay, so things which enable you to grow are really good. So let's talk a bit about market research. What you want to do is go through an system and say, I really want to go out and figure out what's going to sell in a marketplace. And there's more to it than saying, well, my mom really likes it, because all moms always like the stuff you do. Even when you're, no matter what it is, you have to go and figure it out. So you really have a couple of things you want to say. I have market research questions, things I want to ask, things I want to figure out the answer to. And then I can actually sit down and say, I take the data and turn it into information. And then finally, can I act upon it? And my research becomes my plan. And I can actually budget money to act upon what I find out in the plan. And you can go through this. You can iterate. You go around 3 times. So one of the key things that a lot of early stage companies need is, it doesn't need to be formal, but there's a little bit of a group of advisors, people you can go to and talk to and say, does this make sense? And I think one of the key ones there is that quite often it's not going to be somebody who's going to steal your idea. You don't need to be worried about it, but it's somebody who's just going to give you a perspective. It helps you understand about the marketplace. And the more good people you have to do that with, the easier it gets. So another way of putting it is, what's the value proposition? In the words of Sam Walton, if you ever get confused, go to the store, watch the customers, because they have all the answers and all the money. Okay, so people vote with their wallets. So one of the key things is to make sure this, I really like this, but I wouldn't pay you for it. I really like it, but it's free. If it's nice, there's all sorts of different ways of interpreting a response. So one of the key ones is that you need to come around and say, I want to do some market segmentation. And I was at a session earlier on today where there's some really interesting groups presenting, and they were talking about, I'm going to sell to people who are between the ages of 19 and 44, so that's nice, that's reliable. People are born on a certain date, you can figure out their age, and things like that. And they're going to live in large cities, they're going to do a whole series of things, but at the end of the day, they're taking size, trends, and market segments, and they're coming up with data that's reliable, but they're not honing in on the use case. So every time you have a product, you have to sit down and say, I could build something that's really neat that could be used by a doctor in a doctor's office, but it would also be used by, let's say, the receptionist or a nurse. What is the specific use case? How is that product going to be used in the marketplace? If you know that, then you can back out some of the other things. Or, could it also be used by a dentist? Could it also be used by a lawyer? All sorts of different components. And at the end of the day, you want to understand two things. What's the problem you're solving? And the problem may be for the end consumer, or it may be for some part of the value chain that goes all the way along. All right, what are the requirements? Okay, what does the customer require? What does the channel require? What do partners require? Okay, there's a whole series of components that you want to find out about the marketplace. So one of the key ways of looking at different market segments and different ways of doing things is that we have revolutionary products that truly do change the world. Or we have evolutionary products that are built on top of other components, and they're an evolution of the way things are used. Most of the products that we see and deal with every day are more evolutionary products. So in the last 30 years, what's a good example of something that's really revolutionary, that's changed things? Let's make it 40 years, and that makes a couple of other things eligible. Sorry? So the internet, that's really changed stuff. Yeah. The cell phone. So mobile devices. Really, really making a difference. Who else had something? Sorry? Okay, so you get really, really revolutionary products. Like you go back in time 100 years ago, artificial light makes an incredible difference. Things like that are really different. But you do get some very, very well-known products. In the consumer sense, the iPod, which is then part of the iPhone family and the iPad family, those are revolutionary products. Everybody could build them, but the fact that they were adopted so much really made them very revolutionary. And just the fact that they were there changed the marketplace around them. Right? So there's a whole series of things that are really important. Usually a revolutionary product ends up dominating the segment or totally changing or restructuring a segment. So why do we segment? One of the key things is that if we want to sit down and say, I only have so much marketing money, I only have so many resources, I have to figure out who I'm going to sell to, it helps us say, who do I try to sell this product to? Because if I just put it out on my webpage and assume that everybody's going to figure out how to come to my website, how to use it, how to buy it from me, how to install it all on their own, I'm going to be like about 10 million other companies. Okay, it's very difficult to do that. So it really makes it a lot easier for it to be targeted with where we're going to go, and especially when we're trying to get our first 10 customers. So one of the challenges for everybody in this room is to say, how do I get my first 10 customers for my product, especially the people I don't know? How do I figure who they are and how they want to buy it? It makes it a lot easier to say, what will I partner to get and what will I not build? Okay? I don't have to do absolutely everything. Okay? I'm doing some work with an interesting little company that makes airbags for wheelchairs. Neat little company called MobiSafe. You can find their website and stuff. So somebody who's in a wheelchair, it crashes, the airbag pops out. Neat little idea and stuff like that. They don't build the wheelchair, okay? All they do is the airbag, all right? They just do the one piece. One of the things it does is it limits real competition. All the wheelchair manufacturers don't want to compete with them because they're not sure about the marketplace, but they're really happy making wheelchairs where they can install their product. It also helps you leverage other success and move into other segments. And eventually, if you're a big player in a marketplace, it allows you to really, really grow and to move sideways. But if you're going to write a business plan for New Ventures BC where you're going to turn around and end up growing and dominating the North American market in 3 or 4 years, I'd have to say congratulations, because you're going to do something that no company in British Columbia has ever succeeded in doing in the past. Okay, it's really hard to go and all of a sudden just be the market leader worldwide in a very short period of time. So why? If you look at a lot of the people who are well-known, Mark Andreessen is one of the folks from Silicon Valley, says the #1 company killer is lack of marketplace. So getting a product market fit is really important. One of the venture capital firms here in Vancouver did what they call a loss analysis of a whole series of investments they made where the company really failed. They put in a whole bunch of money, millions of dollars, and at the end of the day, they ended up shutting it down. We did not succeed. And I think they had 40 companies they analyzed. And in 2 cases, they decided the technology never really did what it was supposed to do. In the other 38 cases, they decided they never really got to the stage where the market was accepting the product. We could talk about management team, But one of the realities with venture capital companies is if they don't think the management team is working, they change those guys out. So in this case, it's either product, market, or people, and they decided really their biggest problem was always in the market space. So I've talked a little bit about it, but one of the best people to discuss this and tell us more about it is one of the gentlemen called Steve Blank from Silicon Valley. So we'll just go through what he has.
I realized that this might actually be a fundamental problem with most startups, is that actually startups were burning money by starting sales and marketing and business and development activities either on the web or physically in the real world way too early. Because if you think about it, here we are in Silicon Valley. At least those of us physically here, not those watching on TV. But for those of us here in the Valley, we take technical risks with products all the time. Investors put huge bets on all of you to do innovative things. Anybody have any idea what percentage of startups fail because their technology fails? Any idea? How many think it's over 50% of startups fail because the technology didn't work? All right? Over 50%. Over 25%. How many think it's over 25% fail because technology doesn't make it? Turns out less than 10% of startups fail because the engineers were just wrong. Turns out most startups, and I'll leave life sciences aside for a second, most startups in every other field other than life sciences, over 90% fail because they didn't find a market and customers. Full stop. Big idea. Well, if that's the case, and go ask your favorite venture capitalist or next guest, and you're going to have a lot of them in this class and other class. Go ask them. If that's the case, why is it that we have tons of methodologies to measure and help us getting the product right, but no methodologies to help us get the stuff about customers and markets right? Anybody ever been in a company in product management or know what product management people do? And there's some people in the back of the room. There's entire tool sets on how to manage technology risk. Tons. But there are almost no tools to manage customer and market risk. Well, think about this. You're an entrepreneur. I have a great idea. Good, let's go build it. Oh, good, let's go raise money. Oh, let's go sell it. You know what the next step is? Oh, we're out of business. Because most of us grow up reading these wonderful stories about all the people who made a ton of money at Google and Facebook and other companies that, like, these are great examples. Do you ever notice they don't bring in the people who you didn't hear about? Because you wouldn't come. How about bringing in the people who said, you know, I created my last 7 companies. Let me tell you why. You'd go, well, I don't want to be one of those. I want to be Google and Facebook. That's whose presentations I want to hear. Any idea what the ratio is between the Googles and Facebooks and other startups? You know how many companies fail every year in Silicon Valley? You might want to guess. You know what the ratio is? I'm sorry? Over 1,000 to 1. Now, one of the nice things about human nature is every one of you is going to be convinced that you're going to be Google and Facebook. You have to be, right? I mean, that's the passion of an entrepreneur. You have to be convinced, you know, those other 999 companies, they were just idiots. I'm much smarter than them because I have a better idea and we're cool.
Okay. So it's interesting to listen to what Steve Blank says. One of the key things that you hear in one of the statements he made is that not Facebook or Google as failure. Well, that's maybe the Silicon Valley investor version of life, but some of the tier 2 companies, I think we'd be very happy to own those. All right, so what is a failure and what takes off and becomes a billion-dollar company are two different things. So one of the key components in this is we're trying to get from hypothesis to reality. So large companies will execute in the marketplace because they've been there for a long time. If you go to IBM, their earnings don't change that much from month to month. Microsoft products are relatively stable. They do new things, but they very clearly target the marketplace. Startups are in search of a business model. They're trying to understand, how do I build something? How do I measure what happened? How do I learn from it? And how do I iterate again? And one of the best ways you can say is I'll ship it and see what happens, or I'll make a prediction, ship, measure the results, repeat, and then see what happens again. And at the end of the day, what I'm trying to do is prove that your product fits the market reality. So there's a very good angel investor in Vancouver, and when he meets a company, if he thinks this is what they're doing, he'll spend a fair bit of time with them. If he thinks that's what they're doing, he'll try to end the meeting as fast as possible, because he just doesn't think that he can succeed by spending time with them. So if we sat down and said, we know exactly what the use case is for the product, we understand why there's growth, we understand what the trends are in the marketplace, then we can make a very educated bet to figure out what to do and what to sell. So once again, I'm going to go to one of the real experts in the marketplace and let him speak on behalf of everything. So who's here knows what Next was? Okay, good. There's other people who are of a certain age in the audience. That's a good thing. One of the statements Apple always made is that we don't do market research. We just build revolutionary products. Well, at the beginning, they were like everybody else. And they did do market research. It was only near the end, when they were the market leader, that they had the right to do the revolutionary product.
For those of you that don't know me, my name's Steve Jobs, and this is the first of one of many Chalk Talks we're going to have this year together. The subject of this one is really important, which is who is our target customer? Why are they selecting our products over our competition's? And what distribution channels are we going to use to reach these customers? A lot of light bulbs have come on over the last 90 days. I've had the good fortune to be with a lot of you out in the field, meeting customers, getting firsthand information as to what they're doing with our products. You have fed a lot of information to the management of this company, and we've done a lot of thinking and looked at the data, and all of a sudden out of this data, some very, very important things have come to light. I want to share them with you today. We've had, historically, a very hard time figuring out exactly who our customer was. And I'd like to show you why. When we first look at the workstation marketplace, it looks something like this. And the biggest player, as you know, in the workstation marketplace is Sun. Second biggest player is HP Apollo. Third biggest player is DEC. And IBM with the RS-6000 is now in the game as well. And then, outside the workstation marketplace, the very large market for PCs and Macintoshes, the traditional personal computer market. Now, we looked at the workstation marketplace and we said, wow, we have multitasking. We have great networking, just like the workstations. We use Unix. We have a pretty good development environment. So we're a lot like these folks. But then again, these folks don't really care about user interface, or at least they haven't been able to execute on it if they do. They don't really have great third-party application software. And these are not machines for mere mortals. So we're not like them at all. And then we look at the PCs. And we do strive to get a suite of application software that allows us to be just like these folks. We do strive to attain ease of use, and actually are easier to use than even a Macintosh today. So we're a lot like these folks. But then again, we have multitasking and networking that is an order of magnitude beyond what you can do with a PC today. So over the last year, we've oscillated back and forth between thinking that the PCs and the Macs were our competitors, and this is where we want it to be, or the workstations were our competitors, and this is where we want it to be. In essence, are we an easier-to-use workstation, or are we a more powerful PC? And had it not been for a revelation, if you will, 5 or 6 months ago, we probably would still be oscillating today. And what that revelation was that somebody turned up the power of our microscope a little bit, and we saw something very important. And what we saw was that the workstation marketplace is really not just one workstation marketplace, but two. There's the traditional half, which is what we've come to know and love, science and engineering, which does indeed look just like this. But there's a new half emerging, which we're calling the professional half. That is, professionals that are not scientists and engineers who want the power of workstations. And inside this marketplace, there are several sub-markets. Publishing, the high end of the publishing market, tech pubs. Medical, a lot of database-driven applications. Higher education, etc., etc., etc. Legal markets in here, many, many markets are in here. And what's very interesting is Sun is the only company that seems to have eked out a beachhead over here. And our data says that in 1990, Sun sold around 40,000 computers into this market and had about an 80% market share. So the entire professional workstation market in 1990 was about 50,000 units. And Sun had the majority share. That's why we didn't see it before. It was such a small blip compared to the workstation marketplace or, of course, the PC marketplace that it did not show up on our radar screen. But we've seen it now, and it's good that we have, because this is a marketplace that we can dominate. And it's a marketplace that's going to be very large. The market research data that we have, and also our gut feelings from many, many years in the industry, say that this marketplace in 91 is going to grow to about 100,000 units in size. It's going to double this year. And next year in 92, it's going to triple to about 300,000 units. That is a substantial marketplace. What is also exciting about this marketplace is that 100% of our volume goes in here. In other words, if we could ship 50,000 computers into all these markets this year, we would have a 50% market share of one of the fastest growing segments of the entire computer industry. Now, let's examine why this thing is going to grow. What is going to cause this thing to grow from 50 to 100,000 to 300,000 units? Clearly, it is not these people deciding to stop being engineers and go to business school and reemerge over here. That's not how it's going to grow. It's going to grow from two factors. Number one, these folks moving in. PCs and Mac owners deciding that they need more sophisticated networking, more sophisticated development environments, etc., deciding they need to step up to workstations. And one other class of users. There's a lot of people now using 3270 terminals or terminal emulators hooked up to a mainframe for database-driven applications. More and more, they are deciding to move their applications onto a powerful desktop workstation connected via networking to the mainframe so that they can get the application out of the mainframe and onto the desktop for more rapid development, for better user interface, and for better economics. So these two factors are what's going to cause this market to increase almost an order of magnitude in size over the next 24 months. And we can get half of it. Now, one of the things that is very interesting is that Sun is today the major participant in this marketplace with an 80% market share. And I personally don't see too many other people being able to move into this marketplace over the next few years. I believe Sun will remain our major competitor. The funny thing is, while we're convincing these people using PCs and Macs and these people using 3270 terminals or equivalents to move in to the professional workstation segment, Sun is, if you will, our friend. Because they're going to spend their marketing money to convince people to move into this segment. But the minute they've made their choice to move into the segment, whether we've convinced them or Sun has convinced them, Sun and Next are mortal enemies. And the good news, which we'll talk about in a minute, is that we've had a chance to suit up against Sun with our new products about 15 times in the last 90 days, and we've won 15 out of 15.
So he does a lot of things really well. He clearly indicates what's the use case, who's going to use it, why is it a new segment, is there growth? You go from 50 to 100 to 200,000 or to 300,000. So you can see the growth in it. He understands the competition. The part that's scary is that all the companies he lists there, other than IBM, they're all gone. I mean, does he look like a fun guy to compete with? No. So he's done a really good job of forecasting a little bit of the future and indicating that they will target a certain use case in specific vertical markets. And some of them are still consistent with Apple. Education, graphic designers as part of the tech pub market are some of the target markets that they always have had. The outcome of Next was really quite interesting. Obviously a venture-backed company. The VCs, when the company was sold back to Apple, got a fair bit of money, over $400 million. Steve Jobs became the CEO of Apple. That's how he returned. I think he ended up with something like 25% of the stock of the company, which is pretty good, considering what it turned out to be later. And the products they were building became part of the Apple product line as they went forward. So a real success story, and a very clear way of indicating how you're going to make a prediction, you're going to ship it, measure the results, and see what happens. Something that's really quite important. And one of the key components that's in there is that he said we're going to sell, this market will have 50,000 units, then it'll have 100,000 units. We can sell them. He has a very good idea of who's going to buy each one of them. So one of the key things he's doing is setting himself up to do a bottom-up forecast for revenue. I think I'll sell X number to tech publishers. I think I'll sell Y number into the educational market. And he's able to do a revenue projection, which is something, the number of leads, how many potential customers are, what's my percentage win rate. He says he's going to do well against Sun. What's my price? And that's my revenue. I can do a real forecast for revenue. This is something that's a really important factor. When you're doing the New Ventures BC competition, if you say, I'm going to get 10% of a market, it sounds nice, but it also can be interpreted as you don't really know who's going to buy next. You're just hoping that 1 out of 10 people does buy. So one of the key things is that a top-down, good addressable market makes it worthwhile, but a bottom-up forecast is an indication that you really do have a good idea of who's going to buy the product and for how much money. And as we're playing videos, I'll show you one more, which is a really good way of not doing it.
What is the most popular thing in the world?
Music.
No.
Tell me.
Ice cream.
Okay.
Everyone has it. And what is the problem with ice cream?
I have no idea.
It drips.
Okay.
So my idea is what?
To make a drip-proof ice cream.
No. Oh, that's a fucking brilliant idea, this. All right, whatever. You ain't going to come out with that, though.
No, I promise you I won't.
Well, my idea is to come out with just like these ice cream gloves that make the ice cream not go on your hands and make it all well sticky. And also keep your hands warm when you is eating the ice cream.
Okay.
Is you win or is you win?
Okay, well, it sounds like a good idea, and I hope you make a lot of money. Good luck, folks. It's been nice seeing you. You take care of yourself, okay?
Well, if you're going to be in on that.
Well, it sounds like an interesting...
We've got that P. Diddy is going to be in it.
Good.
It is ice cream.
Do you want me to eat this?
No.
No, okay.
What's my idea?
Lay it on me.
The ice cream glove. That's a C, which means that you can't nick it.
All right.
Have you seen one of these things before?
Sure.
Everyone in school learns these things.
Sure.
Venn diagrams.
Sure.
People who like ice cream. People who has hands.
Sure.
What's this section here? That's our target market, isn't it?
Okay.
We did an intranet search for ice cream. And we come back with 6,121 result. We did an intranet search for the gloves. How much results did we get? 325, 0, 113. So you times those together, what does you get? This is just people on the internet looking in. 203 zillion, whatever, 496,400, and then a 1. Check this out. If all those people bought one glove at $19.99, just one glove, business would be worth, wait for it,
I'm waiting.
that much. That is such a big number, couldn't fit it that way. That in English, 34.6 million billion dollars. How does we...
Anyways, it's the exact opposite of Steve Jobs, but you get the idea. So he's saying that doing something in the ice cream market is good. It's in a good addressable market. I mean, I actually thought Donald Trump's idea was better than his glove idea. But this doesn't fit in with how you actually run a business at the beginning. Like if you're IBM, you may say, well, I'm interested in doing business in China. Maybe the fact that it's an addressable market by itself is worth it, but not for a small early stage company. So top-down is valuable. You can sit down and say, what's my addressable market? So there's a theoretical market for everybody. But if I'm a small company in Vancouver, what's my real potential market? Who's available to me in North America? Who can I really address with the market reach that I have? Who do I target? And then I figure out what market demand is, and all those things help me. So I can target people I can communicate with. And if it turns out that I'm selling, let's say, hot water heaters, and hot water heaters are purchased probably once every 10 or 12 years because that's when they die, then my demand is 1/10 or 1/12 approximately. So I can figure these things out and turn them into a little bit of linear algebra. Target markets are also a function, especially in the B2B world, of things like available budget. All right? Is there money available? What can I reach in the marketplace? How many of the companies that I'm trying to target with a B2B product can I actually communicate with effectively? What's my attach rate? My attach rate is they'll actually pay attention to me as a small company and talk to me. My conversion rate, where they'll actually be somebody that I think I can really sell to, and finally, what's my win rate? In other words, how many of them become my customers? I can quantify all of those things as I'm doing a little bit of a bottom-up forecast for different things. So there's a neat company. Anybody here from Launch Academy? A couple of guys. So there's a company down in Launch Academy that's got a really neat CRM product. And a couple of years ago, he built his CRM product, and he's really competing with Salesforce and a lot of other big companies. And he was really pleased that in the first 6 months, he had 2 customers. And then 2 years later, he still had 2 customers. And he said one of the problems he had was that he could talk to everybody, but at the end of the day, they'd look at him and go, you're a 2-guy company, you look risky compared to Salesforce or IBM or whoever it was, and he couldn't win. He could get all sorts of guys to talk to him, he couldn't get checks from them. So there's a whole series of things that are important to understand the conversion rate at each step in the marketplace. So basic forecasting approaches, top-down, helps you understand whether the market's really worthwhile. Okay, so there's a really interesting company here a couple of years ago. Who's heard of Xantrex? Yeah, so Xantrex built really neat power supplies and inverters and all sorts of different things for the power market. And eventually the company got, I think, over 100 million in sales. Public company, did really, really well. And it had all sorts of neat products that sold really well in North America. It became clear that they could, in order to compete worldwide, they'd have to go and hire all sorts of people. In other words, salespeople and all sorts of different continents and all the other stuff. And they ended up selling the company to Schneider Electric because Schneider was a big company that already had all of the infrastructure. So the addressable market for their product gave them a premium when the company was sold and meant that a large company with all the infrastructure wanted to add what Xantrex was to its product line. It's more relevant at the beginning when you're doing a bottom-up one to be able to estimate future demand and to try to do it as accurately as possible. Because every time you get it correct with a customer, they pay you money. And that's one of the key goals that most of us have. So one of the other comments, though, is that the internet's different. Because quite often you get traffic, and traffic will show up, and traffic is good. It's helpful. It may not be money right away, but quite often internet traffic can be helpful. So you'll have website visitors. People come to your website. If you're in the B2B space and you have a really good blog, a person who comes to your blog regularly is relatively valuable. Way more valuable than somebody who just comes to your website every once in a while. Because it means that they're actually very engaged with what you're talking about and what you're doing. Twitter followers, user group participants, again in the B2B space, especially in an industrial space. Somebody who comes into a LinkedIn group and comments on very specific technical items is very engaged in that marketplace. So a couple of years ago, we did a research project into fuel cells and applications in the construction industry. And I'm not a big expert in fuel cells, but one of the things we did is we found a couple of LinkedIn groups which were about fuel cells. And I posted a couple of questions on the LinkedIn group, and all these Einstein people from all over North America answered them for me, like people I didn't even know existed. But it turned out that the user group that was part of LinkedIn was far more valuable than anything we put on a website or tried to email around to the people that we knew. So Facebook followers or click-through advertising, this whole series of things that you can use on your website to take the traffic and then quantify it into something that's of value and make it more of a predictor of revenue, a predictor of conversion and stuff. So Job said it really well. What's our headpin segment? I'm going to start somewhere, then I will grow in the marketplace afterwards. Usually early stage companies need to do that. And one of the components of succeeding is that all the money may not be in the first segment I go after. It may not have that much of a margin in it, but it's somewhere where I can succeed, and then I get to move into the second row afterwards. Whole series of things. So if there's a way of putting it in a bit of a prescription, I target a niche market with a must-have value proposition and move on from there. So we go back to Hootsuite as an example. They did an incredibly good job with Twitter. And then once they succeeded with that and Twitter was growing, they were able to expand to provide a product for all social media, for doing a whole series of other things and managing the content on your website and a lot of stuff. So you want to win or identify a segment, become a market leader, and then leverage that to move on. So we talked about this earlier on. For the companies that do really well in New Ventures BC, they're probably doing number 1 and 2, and they're working really hard to figure that out. Or if it's fuzzy and there's a whole bunch of assumptions, one of the key things you should be doing in this competition is trying to validate your assumptions and make them real. I want to go from assumption to marketplace. So what I'm trying to really do is go from an internal focus where I'm going to build my product and I got to decide what features to put in. And if you have a company with 14 different engineers and everybody has the same vote, then you're probably going to have a really good feature list at the beginning. Okay, so one of the things you have to do is say, that's interesting. I want to know what the customers really value. So if I go out and talk to the customers and they say, I really value these things, then I can get rid of a lot of the other features in my first version of the product. I go from features to differentiating the product. It will work really well for dentists. It won't work for doctors at the beginning, or it's marginal for doctors, but I only care about dentists because they're my headpin segment. I go from reactive R&D to knowing which ones my headpin segment is, and I go from being unpredictable to reliable customers. Something that's really important that way. Okay. So when you're doing research, you can have secondary research, which is stuff you find on the internet, or you can do primary research, which is face-to-face. What's one of the best places to do market research? So if I was going to say, I can go to it'll cost you $1,000 to go to Silicon Valley to go to a big, huge trade show. What's the benefit of going to that trade show? Okay, yep?
Dedicated audience.
Absolutely. It is a dedicated audience. And most trade shows, the booths are populated by sales guys, and they're not allowed to leave. Okay, they have to stay on the booth. So you can walk up and essentially talk to them or quiz them for a long, long time. And sales guys will tell you anything because they think you might be their next customer. So they'll tell you all about the product they're going to build next year and how it's going to be great. And there's all sorts of things. So although trade shows can look expensive, the fact that everybody's in one place allows you to understand the marketplace really well. And it's not something you go on, one of the great comments about secondary research is, I can go on the internet, I can find all sorts of stuff. Some of it's not going to be correct. You have to understand how to filter a lot of the stuff that's out there. So obviously primary research is important. You can do qualitative research, which is a few people, almost anecdotal. I get somebody who's really understands the marketplace, and what they say is really important to me. That's different than doing a survey where I have to have at least 50 people to make it statistically correct. Okay? The anecdotal evidence from people who are really well known in the marketplace may be as good or better than a quantitative survey. Okay. So just some of the real comments in this is that when you're doing stuff, is you're there to listen. Okay? Try to spend as little time as possible explaining what your product will be or what your service will be. Make sure you're doing that. Technology adoption. What time have we got, Angie? 10:02. We'll do one more section, and then we'll take a break. Okay? Let's talk about technology adoption cycle. What are the factors in a customer's requirements? Why do they buy? What's in it for me? What's in it for us? One of my partners carries a minimum of 3 smartphones at all times. I think he's so much of an early adopter. He's all the way over on the left-hand side of the diagram. He doesn't think he's a techno enthusiast. I think he's crazy. Like, who needs 3 cell phones? Give me a break. Okay? So one of the things it really does is that if you understand adoption and how people are going to do things, it helps you to understand your marketing strategy and what you're going to do in terms of activities. The market is changing dramatically. All right? Early adopters, if you look back in 2010, over half of U.S. households consider themselves early adopters of technology. What this tells you is and now it's over 2/3. It tells you that everybody wants technology all the time. Right? So we actually consider it part of like clothing. It's part of our persona to have this and to use it all the time. So you get all sorts of different comments about what people would do. Anybody here have teenage children? Okay. So everybody understands what it is to be an inferior product. Good. One of the key things and when you watch your teenage kids, they'll have a smartphone. They don't use computers, right? They do everything on a handheld. Like, they're really used to just consuming things all the time on a mobile device. So their behavior is dramatically different than my parents grew up during the Depression. You know, as my mom said, we were one of the first people to get a phone. The phone number was 342. Okay, so things have changed dramatically. Again, some of the research, all sorts of different companies or different households will expect technology to be there all the time. All right? And internet behavior is really, really important. So when people go onto the internet, they will use search all the time to look for stuff. And the things that they do online, it continually grows. So how many of you have purchased travel online? Right? So it should be almost everybody, unless you've never gone anywhere. Okay? So 30 years ago, you didn't do that. Right? Where did you buy travel 30 years ago? Travel agents. Travel agents almost don't exist anymore. They're all in the specialty cruise business. So the internet has allowed the travel industry to restructure totally the purchasing process for people to buy stuff. How many of you have bought clothing online? Okay, so you see more people putting their hand up. How many of you have bought furniture online? Okay, so it's interesting. 3 years ago, I asked that question and only 2 people put their hand up. Okay, so it's changing. How many of you bought a car online? So you guys have Teslas? Okay, because that's one of the few cars you can buy online. All right? Yeah, you can do everything. So one of the realities is that most of us will go and spend, the adage now is that when somebody actually contacts your company to ask you a question, they have done 60% of their market research. So I get phone calls at the sailing school this time of the year. The desk phone is forwarded to myself or my partner. People phone up and they want to ask a question. It's very clear they've read everything on the website. All right, so people do their research and then they just show up very late in the business decision. So even if you're a clean tech or a biotech company, if you can't communicate online when people are trying to figure out what they're interested in, you're putting yourself behind the 8 ball. Okay, so it's really important to understand that everybody adopts things now by at least searching for information on the internet. So the buyer's process. So what this is doing is actually comparing 2 different studies, study 1 and study 2. But it says senior executive involvement in the buying cycle. So if you look at early in the buying cycle, where they're understanding the issues, they're establishing the objectives, and they're deciding what the strategy is, they're involved 70 to 80% of the time. And then when somebody actually, let's say you're selling a business-to-business product, when somebody phones your company to ask you questions, it's not the senior guy, it's somebody who's a buyer who's going through all the details of figuring out if you qualify. And then you'll go back, and it's only near the end that the senior people get involved again. All right? So they go through all the process and stuff, say, this is what we need, somebody else executes, and they come back and make sure it works. The thing that's really interesting is that I gather senior executives in big companies, the vast majority of them spend hours online looking at stuff. How many of you comment all the time on the internet and post stuff all the time? Okay. How many of you do that occasionally? How many of you are like me and you lurk but never say anything? Okay. Senior executives do that. You don't know they're there, but they're looking at your website all the time. It's a fact. Okay. So one of the key things that you want to do is understand the buyer's process. So if I'm targeting doctors or I'm targeting dentists, I have to really understand, what are the stages they go through, where they go, oh, I have an issue, I have a problem, I understand what it is, I need to find a solution, I need to become aware of who actually could solve my problem. Then I actually get into the process of deciding who's important. So what are the potential solutions? What are the things that I will do? So when you're looking at this, one of the key components that's important is that at the beginning, I'm aware I have a problem. All right? The thing that dominates is what is the problem? Okay? Somebody is saying, I'm a buyer, whether it's a business or whether it's an individual. Unless it's gum, at the checkout stand in Safeway, I'm sitting there saying, I have an issue, I want to solve the problem. Then I'll go through consideration where I'm actually comparing, trying to figure out what's different. I'll sit down and say, who's got the solution? I'll do some comparisons, the whole thing. And at the end, the thing that comes to the top is brand. In other words, nobody ever got fired for buying Microsoft Office. So if you're a little tiny company, you're all by yourself, it makes it a lot harder. And I told you the example of the guy with the CRM product earlier on before. When brand comes to the top, or at least perception of brand, it's a lot harder for him to succeed. He doesn't have the same image as an IBM, or he doesn't have the same image as a Canadian Tire, or whatever else it is. So those things are all factors. Also, it's complex. If it's a government organization, the numbers are even higher. Okay, people who are involved in decision making. So if you're selling in the B2B world, it takes time. It's not like B2C where people sort of make decisions. So just as an interesting example is for consumers, the biggest item that most people ever buy is a house or a condominium. All right, so it's the most thought through decision they'll make. So they end up talking to all sorts of friends. They get advice from all sorts of people all over the place. All right, so that's what happens. So the consumer version of this is a big high-ticket item that's like that. All right. The next biggest thing is buying a car. All right. And unfortunately, car buying is different. So they say that the majority of people in auto malls on the weekend are guys who already bought a car, just they were so excited about it. Now they're checking out to see if they got a good price. Okay. So there are a whole series of participants in the buying process. Who's the user, who's the influencer, who's the buyer. At this alien school, the buyer is the mother. It's not the kid, it's the mother. It's very clear. The father may have some influence, but let's not have him overestimate how much. Okay, so the buying, and as the older the kid, the more the influence switches in teenage versus a 7 or 8 year old. The teenager has a lot more leverage in the buying process is different. There's deciders, there's a whole series of gatekeepers. Let's take a break. We'll come back. We'll talk a little bit about how social media is changing this, and then we'll get into the execution part, which is a little bit of whole product, positioning, pricing, and then measuring stuff. Okay? Okay. So one of the key things is the social medias and social media platforms have really changed a lot of stuff. And this diagram is a little bit old, but you'll see that there are a whole series of platforms out there, and social media is another way of communicating with the marketplace. And it's a very important part of what your company will do in terms of its persona, its image, a lot of different things. And in its own right, it can be a vehicle for finding either consumers or finding a business or different things. So over 93% of all B2B marketers are engaged in some form of social media marketing. So it's a very big part of what you do. It's an important part of the things that you work on. So if you're in the business-to-business sector, LinkedIn tells you who you are. So one of the companies I deal with, a very early stage company, does stuff with nanostructures. They sit down and say, I could work in these vertical markets. If you go to LinkedIn, you can find the major players in those vertical markets on LinkedIn. You can figure out all the different people who work in the company, their job titles, and understand who the potential decision makers are. So who you then need to figure out how to communicate with. All right, you can do all of those things on LinkedIn in a business, in sort of a business-to-business product. In this case, one of the professors at Simon Fraser University happened to be connected to the person they thought was the decision maker. Very easy to get an introduction. A lot simpler than emailing the guy and hoping. Okay? Facebook, obviously consumer stuff. Twitter. One of the key things that Twitter does is that Twitter is immediate. It's right now. It's what's happening at this time. So it turns out to be far better for converting people to make decisions than some of the other forms of social media. One of the statements you get from a company is that if somebody contacts you and wants information about your product, if you answer them immediately, and immediately is immediately, it's not an hour from now, it's not next week or whatever, they are 40 times more likely to buy than if they have to wait. So Twitter is immediate. It's an important factor in it. Instagram, very visual product, all sorts of different things that all fit in. There's a whole series, and I've only put up a selection of them, a whole series of different social media that are important. Stats, over 1 billion users on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, blogs. So there's almost 200 million blogs in existence now. And they're very targeted, they're very specific. I met somebody the other day who's got a really interesting product that he wants to target a certain part of the marketplace with. And one of the things he did was he found there were 4 or 5 very influential bloggers. He started posting on their blogs and they started following him and commenting on his. He also started doing book reports. And then everybody said, wow, these book reports are interesting. So his status as a thought leader went through the roof. And that in its own right created a lot more traffic to the very niche market that he was interested in. And videos, we all understand the volume of video that everybody has to do and stuff like that. They do different things. If you want to publish stuff, you want to share things, you want to network, you want to discuss stuff. So it's not like I do everything. I have to understand what my goals and objectives are. How do I communicate with my target audience? Are they going to be on Facebook? Or if it's a business-to-business thing, are they going to be on LinkedIn? How am I going to communicate with them? What are the different ways of communicating with them? So at the sailing school, one of the things we're doing is we have a pretty active Instagram account because one of the markets we're intrigued in is the teenage market. They don't necessarily come and take sailing lessons a lot, but if they're interested in what we do, then they'll participate in stuff, and they actually are, we think, more likely to come as young adults if they're interested when they're teenagers. So posting stuff on Instagram we find is really effective because they're A, way better at it than I am, and B, it's something that they really like to do. So there's a whole different things in your toolkit. How many of you will use LinkedIn for your business? How many of you will use Facebook for your business? Okay. Somebody is going to use 2 of them. Could you give me an idea of why? Somebody is going to use the 2 tools, but for different reasons. Could somebody volunteer? Yeah?
We have 2 sides to our business.
Okay.
So on the B2B, LinkedIn is...
So the consumer side is Facebook, the business side is LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good. So one of the other key things is the tools you're going to use when you're doing this. And you can use a number of different components, but understanding the Alexa rating, okay? Is this a popular website? Am I getting traffic? Where do I rank? What are my Google Analytics? Does my traffic go up or down? Does it make a difference? The sailing school, I'll tell you right now that our Google Analytics and our traffic increases significantly when the weather's sunny rather than rainy. So I have very limited ability to change that, but it's a fact. So if we're going to do any marketing, we spend a lot of time looking at the weather forecast to see if we can try to get it so it goes out when it's sunny. And it actually makes a difference. There's a whole different series of things you can use. Google AdWords or keywords. And the keyword tool for Google AdWords will help you understand what type of searches people are making, so therefore what do I need to have in terms of the content that's on my website. I can't just string the words in there now. I can make it so that the content is found. We talked about Hootsuite. Anybody here used HubSpot or Kissmetrics? Okay. Really interesting tool. So HubSpot is a company out of Boston, which is very, very good at helping you manage the content on your website. And one of the things that it has is an excellent newsletter. Actually, I get it every day. It actually drives me crazy. They send it too often. But the one thing they have is they'll have things like the 5 best pricing pages we've ever seen, or how to increase your conversion rate. They also have things like the 10 worst pricing pages we've ever seen, and they stick them up with companies' real pricing pages. Some of them are totally unintelligible, which is probably why they won the award. But HubSpot is great. Kissmetrics, what does Kissmetrics do? Somebody who's used it. It's the key thing that they are able to do really well. They help you a lot with understanding the search engine aspect of your website. So one of the things Kissmetrics does is it helps you understand when people come to your homepage or other pages, where does the mouse travel and what do they click on? So have I got my buy button in the correct place? This is actually kind of creepy almost because they can track people on your website, but it works really, really well. Okay? So using these tools, there's another one I really like. Who's used Unbounce? Okay? What is Unbounce? It's landing pages. So I go and say, well, I'm going to do a marketing campaign. I'll send half of them to one type of landing page, half to another. Turns out that version A is far more successful than version B. It's just what's the appearance of the page. It's not the product. It's what does my website look like. So there's a company in town that sells a really interesting consumer product. And through using all these tools, it's taken its conversion rate from 23% to 80% by slowly but surely iterating its website. And it's made 2 things that are hallmarks of their website is that it's way simpler when you go to the pages now. So you go there and there's like one button. I'm going to convert, yes or no. And then the message is really clear as well. Okay? It's really important that you do this and figure out which tools are going to use. Don't use them all. Figure out a couple and decide which ones are most important for you. There's other ones too. So this is Living Social. Who here has bought a Groupon coupon or bought Living Social? Okay, did anybody buy stand-up paddling in the last week and a half? Okay. These things used to be amazing with what they would do. The effectiveness of the couponing companies is going down through the floor. Okay. So this is a family sailing lesson. Put it on my website for a year, sold 1. Yeah, just nobody came. I thought, well, nobody cares. So I put it on Living Social, sold 100 in half a day. Okay, turned out everybody was at least interested in trying it. First family that came was 2 guys from Nigeria and their buddy from China. But we won't worry about that part. All right, so they're really good. Nowadays, their ability to get to target markets that you can't get to is different. All right, it's really declined. It's become a commodity. Let's talk about 3 things in execution. First one is whole product. What are all the pieces that go into something? And then we'll do positioning, and then finally we'll talk about pricing. So whole product it's the physical product, all the associated factors, and what are the other things that go into the whole product. And if I wanted to describe it, I could say, what are the pieces that I'm going to build in order to get this into the hands of the customer? So one of the companies that we do a lot of work, or did a lot of work with in the past, is a company that started off making a middleware product for handheld devices. And they had a really interesting middleware product, but in order for it to work, they also had to sell cell phone connectivity and they had to sell a smartphone. So they were only really providing one of the 3 pieces that were there. All right, so they were able to get the other pieces from Apple or BlackBerry or Microsoft or from TELUS or from AT&T, whoever else it is. And the fact that they had those big partners actually accelerated them into the marketplace. If it comes from AT&T, I must believe in it. If it's an Apple product, I believe in it. It makes it an awful lot easier for a small company. It allowed them to just focus only on building the software product, something that really helped them out. It also overcame some of the other issues that are really important to have. So there's complementary products that are really, really important. So one of the key things, a lot of times as small companies, we never worry about post-service sales and service because we haven't got to that yet. But a lot of the time, especially if you're selling a B2B product, companies won't buy unless they're absolutely assured that that's going to work. Okay, so I can sit down and say, I'm only a software company. I buy hardware and then I put it all together. What are the peripherals? Are there connectivities? Is there sales and service? What are the things I do? What will my channel partners or my resellers or all the other people do in certain cases? So a company I was with, I guess goes back about 15 years ago, fantastic company, UBC spin-off, had really interesting equipment for putting coatings on metal, on parts, on metal surfaces. So one of the best examples of what they could do was they could spray titanium or they could spray tungsten carbide and all sorts of great stuff. And they could coat many of the pieces that are part of an airplane engine. And so it's like, in order to make them do different characteristics, they have coatings on them. Like over half of the pieces in a jet engine are coated with something. And like all smart guys, we figured who makes the best engines, who do we want to sell to, let's do this. Obviously it's Rolls-Royce, so we're going to sell to these guys. And they bought, after about a year, an experimental system for their lab to figure out how it worked, but we could never get them to buy for their production stuff. We knew it was equipment that was better, it helped them make more efficient parts, everything would be better, just couldn't figure it out. And finally, after about 4 years, one of the guys from their lab came over and went skiing with one of our engineers, and we gave the engineer an unlimited alcohol budget and asked him to ask why the hell they weren't buying this stuff again. And apparently one night he said, one of our unwritten rules at the company, and they're in Glasgow, Scotland, he said, is that if you want to sell to us, you have to have a service personnel who lives within 10 kilometers of our factory. We're like, what? Like, nobody told us that. So we hired somebody, and he lived 8 kilometers from the factory. He got a purchase order next month. So there's a whole bunch of things that are important that are really, really are factors in the whole arrangement. There's other things, too, that we don't understand. And a lot of the time, consumers, people can't explain to you why they're attracted to something. So who's heard of Dunkin' Donuts? Everybody? It's the equivalent of Tim Hortons in the U.S. So a while back, Dunkin' Donuts thought, we're having competition from Starbucks and a bunch of other things. We have to figure out how to compete better and to do things. And one of the things we'll do is we'll do a consumer test. So they gave a whole group of Starbucks guys a Dunkin' Donuts card, said, go to Dunkin' Donuts for a month. And they give a bunch of Dunkin' Donuts guys a Starbucks card and said, go to Starbucks for a month and we'll see who's going to switch. So how many do you think, what percentage of people do you think switched? Who's got a number? 5%? Who's got a bigger number? Anybody got a lower number? Yeah? None. Okay. So the answer is 0. At the end of the day, people didn't switch. And it turned out that, and the exit interviews where they talked to people were the most interesting ones. So the Starbucks guys are like, I go to Dunkin' Donuts and they got Formica tables and booths and and plastic chairs, and you buy these donuts and there's sugar, and all the guys are wearing cat hats and and all this sort of stuff. And then they talk to the Dunkin' Donuts guys and everybody's like, well, I go there and they can't even sell you a small, medium, or large. And they have all these sofas. Like, I'm going to sit on a sofa. And one of the best lines was one of the guys said, it's like spending Christmas with people you don't know. And that's how he described Starbucks. And I thought, oh, cool. So it turned out that they're different tribes, okay? And it has nothing to do with the coffee. It's all about the environment and the atmosphere in the place. The whole product isn't the coffee itself. There's a bunch of stuff in it. So you ask yourself a bunch of questions. What complementary services must be acquired? What additional hardware or software do I need? Will the customers get the ROI without the other complementary services? Online retailing, their biggest cost is when somebody sends something back. It costs them a fortune to take something back. It's a really big issue. Okay? And then understanding all these, will it affect your sales process and how will it affect customer satisfaction? Important things to look at. And how do you market the whole product? Okay? You want to make sure people understand that the whole product has other things in it. And one of the best things for a small company to do is to partner up market. So many of you may make an application that runs on a smartphone. The fact that it's in the Apple Store or in the Android Store legitimizes it. Otherwise, why would they buy from you? It could be just a virus, right? The fact that it's in somebody else's store makes it a far more attractive product. So it helps you to create evidence, and it builds a reference base. In other words, it makes it a lot easier for people to believe in what you're doing. Okay, I get into the part that I find the most interesting, which is the positioning argument. So why will they buy from us versus our competition? It's the key factor, all right? I gave you the example before earlier on of the Volvo and the fact that it hasn't won a safety award in over a decade. Which cars have won safety awards in the last couple of years? No. What, they give it to themselves? So, okay, good, because nobody can afford to drive one, or? All right, no, so Kia and Toyota won a lot of safety awards. Okay, the reality of stuff and positioning are different. Okay, but you can put it in and say positioning is market segmentation and competitive differentiation. I understand why certain people will buy it, and I differentiate my product to communicate that to them effectively. Okay, other definitions. Okay, you can have perceived status within a market segment. I build relationships to secure a competitive advantage. All right, something that marketing folks rely on. So, which of the car companies makes Lexus? It's Toyota, right? So what's the difference between a Toyota and a Lexus? Sorry? About $20,000, right? Okay, one of them is more expensive than the other. And one of the things that Lexus has come with is roadside assist. So if the car ever breaks down, they drive out immediately and pick it up with a truck and take it away. Is that because they think you deserve that, or is that because they're creating the impression that Lexuses never break down? Okay, Jaguar does the same thing. All right, so there's a whole series of things in terms of positioning and how we perceive products, the stuff that we do. So when we're looking at positioning, one of the key benefits for small companies is partnerships. If I can partner with large players, they validate me in the marketplace. What's my pricing? So we'll get into pricing in a fair bit more detail later, but if companies go, all right, I got to enter the market with low price, but I'm going to have a better product. That's a contradiction. It doesn't make sense. Okay? So all the things that are part of your positioning of your product, including its price, have to be consistent and have to have the same message. Do I have good distribution? Do I have quality sales and support? Are people competing with me? And having some competition is a good thing. It's worthwhile. Okay, our positioning process. I do my market research. I say which segments do I really want to target. I decide how to differentiate the product. And when I say differentiated, it's like Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts. We're different in different things. I create different impressions of what the product is. I can actually have true features that are different. Like stereos were the best example. Like, one of them has, more power in it than the other one. Or I can just create perception of differences. I have my competitive differentiation. I test it in the market. I do a positioning statement. In other words, I put a stake in the ground and say, this is what my product's going to do. And then I come up with a marketing plan and target different accounts. And then I reinforce it in the marketplace, and I can go around and around and iterate a fair bit. One of the key things in that is a positioning statement. Okay. Who's the customer? What's their need? This is our product. We differentiate it this way. Our whole product includes a whole series of things, and then I differentiate it again at the end. In other words, what's the value equation at the end? Okay, so I can go through a whole series of steps, and I can actually ask questions and make statements. So one of the best things you need to be able to do is to have a really good positioning statement and say, I have 6 sentences, and I can fill in each one of the 6 sentences and say, this is what they're like. If you want to do something really scary, how many of you have customers today? Okay, go ask your customers to do this for you about your company. You'd be scared what they say. Because some of them have totally different images of what you think your company does. And that's actually the really important thing. It should be consistent at the end of the day. All right, so I can go and say, so for this customer, who needs this, our product does, and the key benefit is this. Unlike the competition, our product does it a better way. One of the things you can do is move number 3, our product, to the top of the list sometimes to make it easier for people to understand what your product is if it's not clear at the beginning. So here's an example. Just read through this one. When was this written? Does anybody know? Apparently this was written 2 years before they launched the product. Is it correct today? Well, you can't really buy an iPod. Well, you can kind of buy retro iPods, I guess. But one thing that's interesting is that if somebody said to me, is it for the mobile high-income individual? The answer is no. But in the reality was, it was at the very beginning, because it was sold to the same market as BlackBerries. Who bought an iPod at the very beginning? How much did you guys pay?
Oh crap, can't remember, but too much.
Yeah. It was like the original list price was $700. So the only people who could afford them were mobile executives. And they actually only released it in Silicon Valley, Austin, Texas, part of LA, and I believe a little area of Chicago. I figured the guys in Iowa could care less. Okay, so they actually went and said, who are the early adopters, and figured that out at the beginning. All right, so it was a very expensive product. Then it became the product for everybody, and the cost and the differentiation went down. But you look at it, and there's a whole series of things that are really well done. The design. Anybody here buy one of these things? One of the other ones? One of the other ones? Yeah. You have fun with that? Yeah. I had 2 kids. I bought one of them an iPod, and I bought the other one a Rio. 2 days later, I threw the Rio away. I just couldn't get the music on it. It didn't work. And I don't consider myself a computer programmer, but it was hard. So one of the key differentiators and value pieces was iTunes. People proved they were prepared to pay extra money for music they already owned for the convenience of getting it on the device. Okay, so the whole product, the whole bundle of all those things really worked for those guys. Here's Starbucks. This is what Howard Schultz said back in 1985. Actually says at the bottom that the key thing is the environment. So Starbucks has in Seattle 2 mock-ups of stores in a warehouse, and they test what the stores look like all the time to make sure with people and with focus groups that the environment is going to evolve the way they want it to evolve. They really do test as much as they can. One thing that's interesting here is he compares it to old technology. So if you were to say, well, I've got a really good way of doing something new, and compared to Facebook, that's really hard to do. You can compare to other social network platforms or old versions of doing things. He compares their coffee to old, drip coffee served in a plastic cup, to the old inferior substitute. FedEx, what do they got here? They've actually done a really good job of condensing it down to a tagline. Where's the tagline? So the logo is good. It's got the arrow in it and stuff, but it's on the door, right? So FedEx is interesting in that it's evolved. So this one is taken on the world on, what is it? The world on time. When they first came out, what was the famous one they had at the beginning? It was when it absolutely positively has to get there. So they defined themselves as a courier company, then as a global courier company, and now they've gone and bought Kinko's and all the other stuff. They're defining themselves as an on-demand office supply store everywhere in the world. So as the company grows and evolves, their tagline and their positioning evolves with it. I think everybody understands this one. Okay. How do you differentiate yourself? It's a very good example. I won't play any of them. So one of the things I'd suggest everybody does is do this product positioning exercise. We won't do it tonight. But sit down and actually write it out a whole bunch. Is there anybody in the audience who's got this fully prepared and knew this question was coming? You want to share it with us? Good?
If I could find it, I'll wing it. GoPlan Go is a online things to do in Vancouver directory, offering guaranteed availability for people who are tired of searching relentlessly online. It provides guaranteed real-time reservations, unlike TripAdvisor that just shows you what you can do. We guarantee that you can do it at the time that you want.
Okay, good, thank you. So 2 key things about internet like this is people cannot search. There's just so much stuff there, we can't go and grind through it all by ourselves. How many of you go to the 4th page of stuff you're searching for? Nobody does that, right? So one of your key value things is the fact that you're curating the content. And that's the word. The word is curating. We curate the content and create a list of items that is customized via algorithm, whatever, to the consumer and provides them with things which match their interests. Okay, so you put it in terms that are like that. Okay? Anybody else want to share one with us? Okay? Here we are. Angie's got a mic for you.
Thank you. For small retail and restaurant owners with multiple locations who need to understand how to increase their sales, Drive BI is a SaaS-based mobile business management software solution that provides the only all-in-one for visual, mobile reporting, marketing ROI, and customer and employee retention tools. Unlike other BI engagement software solutions, we make it easy to get control over your business without IT support, web programmers, or graphic designers. Our app generators allow you to create custom mobile apps in minutes for you to generate content that keep your customers and employees passionate about your business.
Okay, thanks. You need to put the part about the mobile apps at the front, because I didn't really understand what your product did until you said it was a mobile app.
It's not a mobile app.
I know, so I'm confused.
It's actually a management system.
Okay.
One of the components that drives data to the management system are the mobile apps.
Okay, so I think you have to define yourself as a business intelligence company.
If we do that, we're stacked up against other business intelligence companies that do deep drill down. So we're trying to define ourselves as a business management solution, not a BI company.
Okay.
One solution that looks at marketing ROI, customer employee engagement. BI companies don't do customer employee engagement. They
Right.
just do BI.
Okay, so the suggestion I would make is that for what you're doing is relatively complex, give an example. Because otherwise I can't, it just sounds like a bunch of words strung together. You see that, so for this company I would do this. And it makes it easier for me to follow.
As the last line.
Yeah, put it earlier.
Put it earlier.
For a company like this, I would do these things.
Okay.
And this is what the value is, and this is how I'm different from other products.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. Okay, a whole bunch of things go into great positioning. Mostly about the customer. Is it credible? Is it relevant? And does it fit with the trends? And is it unique? Things that are really important. And kind of the acid test is that if you can fit your competitor's product or name into your positioning statement, and it still sounds good, you haven't differentiated stuff enough. Okay, it's really important to say, does this sound like IBM? And I mean, I met a company a while back and they sent me a product description and I cut and pasted the product description into the browser and searched, and it took me directly to one of the pages on IBM's website. And I was like, whoa, this text has been sort of slightly edited, but otherwise it's the same. That's just not good enough. Okay, it's not going to work. All right, let's talk a bit about pricing. One of the sessions later on, we'll have a piece on pricing with Stephen Forth. And Stephen is one of the partners at Rocket Builders. He also has a startup of his own. And he's part of a pricing consulting company that has a lot of expertise in the area. So there are a series of issues. How many of you, when you're talking to customers, hear them say your price is too high? Occasionally you hear that. If it's a professional from purchasing, discount what they're saying. Okay? It's just not true. All right? They're professional buyers. Okay? One of the things you have to understand is that you can have, I can say, do I want to price in the middle of the market? I can price a whole bunch of things, or I can have a different pricing model. All right? So I heard one the other day, which is really interesting in that they price based on, it's a company that has a big HR solution. They price based on the number of employees. But they have a different price for an archived employee than for an active employee. Because most companies want to keep a full database of everybody who's ever worked for them, but they don't want to spend a lot of money on someone who quit 5 years ago. They just need the data. Okay, so something that matches the needs of the customer is really important. Don't discount. Offer promotional pricing. Instead of saying, I'll give it to you at half price, I'll give you 3 months for free. Try to buy. Things like that really work. What are the different licensing alternatives? Okay, what discounts do you provide to resellers? A couple things. So there are a whole number of things that affect your pricing. There's what's called a price ceiling. People normally don't pay any more for this kind of product. Do I buy it through channel? How do I purchase this stuff? Where do I expect to buy it? All right, are there competitive pressures? Are there buyers or customer buying restrictions? And the reputation of the seller. How many of you have an iPhone? Okay, how many of you would, if somebody gave you a free Android phone, would not take it? Okay, there's a fair number of people who are really devoted to one thing. So one of the key components is that those certain products will command premiums in the marketplace. The value proposition and the reputation of the seller means that they are better, at least their perception is greater. They get a higher price. Okay, it's something that's really important. So there's internal factors. There's objectives of the firm. What am I trying to do? Am I trying to get into the marketplace? Am I trying to penetrate? Every small company is trying to penetrate the market. We're not trying to harvest. We're not charging like we already own the marketplace. We're all trying to get into the marketplace. We're still trying to make enough money to keep the doors open. All right, so those are real. There's external factors. There's sort of nature of the market. There's demand. There's competition. There's channel pressure. And those things go into pricing decisions. So there's a specialty spice making company in Vancouver. And it's interesting in that its cost of goods sold, because it makes very specialized things, is actually higher than the list price of one of the big, huge companies from the United States. So they're guaranteed that they will always have to charge more than the big company from the US. The only way they can succeed is by having differentiation. In other words, they have to appeal to other parts of the marketplace. They cannot compete on price. It's a given that that is impossible for them to do. So for a small company, I really suggest do not compete on price. It doesn't make sense. So there's a couple of formulas or ways of looking at it. One of them is there's a price ceiling. You know, what will the customer pay? I mean, our example of Starbucks, they appear to be helping us inch closer and closer to the $10 cup of coffee. So that ceiling's going up all the time. Okay? There's competition in here. The prices are in there. There's a competitive environment. There's a price floor. In other words, there's a place where cost recovery, this is the key to survival. All right? I asked people here earlier on if they sailed. How many of you remember the guys who built the boat called the Laser? Anybody familiar with the boat? Really neat little sailboat, Laser, fun boat, and all that stuff. Turned out that they're really good at building boats, designing boats and stuff, but they weren't all that good at figuring what the margin should be. And one of the 4 times they went bankrupt was because they were selling them for less than what it cost them to make them. They just hadn't figured that part out. Okay. So somewhere between the ceiling and the floor is how you price your product. And there's a number of different forces that are in play. And one of the key things is to understand your differentiated value and then your, so call it your negative differentiated value. So if I do certain things that make my product better, in other words, I differentiate it and it's more valuable to the customer, I get to charge more money. All right? If I do things which create lower value, or my competition does things which are really good, it creates lower value for my product. So one of the best ways to say is that, here's the price of my competitive alternative. If I'm better and I create value, I get to charge a premium, but I have to subtract off the area that's not, which is a product of competition or there's problems with it. So what that ends up being is this is the price range, where I can sit down and say, I add positive differentiation, I subtract negative. Somewhere in here is my price range of what I'm going to be able to pay. If I go right to the top, I'm sort of hogging all the money and not giving any of it to the customer. That usually doesn't work. All right, so I can sit down there and say, if I differentiate my product well enough, I can always get paid more money. How much I pick or how much I share with the customer is important. I kept this in because I really like this slide. I don't know why, but there we are. So one of the beliefs is that if you differentiate your product enough and it gets better and better, and my product becomes the best product, I get more value and I get a higher price, I get to go to the top right-hand corner, which means I'm getting paid a great deal amount of money because people perceive a lot more value in my product. Which smartphone maker likes this curve? Apple, okay? If, on the other hand, everything looks kind of the same and things are standardized, it means that there's less money for the market leader but more money for everybody else. There's a company that is a big supplier and big competitor for Apple that really likes this. Samsung. Okay, so you can see the different strategies. Stuff like that. So if I can become a market leader, I do it through differentiation. All right, if I am trying to standardize everything, cost comes together. If you're flying to Calgary, what are your choices? Air Canada and WestJet, right? Is there a big difference in price? No, every once in a while they play around with the number of seats allocated or something like that to create an illusion of price difference. But in reality, they're usually pretty much the same. It's interesting, but WestJet appears to be friendlier. Air Canada appears to have more flights. But I don't think either of them have differentiated enough to create a price premium. Consumers have proven that we pay based on cost. So just like gasoline and everything else, the best policy for these guys is to make it look like they're competing, but in reality, the prices are almost the same. Okay. Pricing methodology, a series of steps. Determine your market size, define your whole product, what's your cost, estimate the demand. If you can actually find a demand curve, that's great, but I don't think they really exist. Understand that there is demand. Choose a pricing model, set your objectives, set your pricing strategy, and select your pricing. One of the key things is you have to fit into the marketplace. So the company that made the middleware product that ran on smartphones, one of the things it did was it targeted Fortune 2000 at the beginning. In other words, large companies which had enough money to do experiments and play with this stuff, figure out if it worked. They decided that one of the key things was that if you're Fortune 2000, you would not buy cheap stuff. All right, so they actually priced themselves above the midline, closer to the top of the pricing range of the marketplace, because there was associated value with, if it's a highly priced product, it must be good. All right, it's something that is that way. So common pricing errors. So if I put myself in the shoes of the customer, your differentiation is not clear. It's hard to figure out. If I'm looking at it from a competitor standpoint, it's really hard to differentiate from the competitor. There's no negative value associated with the competitor, so I look exactly the same as the competition. It's not good. Strategy, all over the place. How many of you put a sales guy in charge of pricing decisions? Okay, don't do that. All right, because every time they want a sale, they'll continue to discount. All right, something that's important. Execution. The value is not communicated by marketing and sales. Segmentation does not align with value. All right, so you sit down and say, how do I communicate and execute on my pricing strategy? Final piece I just want to run through really quickly is some of the metrics and some of the stuff. Are there any questions? Yeah?
Just a question around pricing and allowance for commission sales. Is there a standard percentage that you would build into your margins model for that? Okay, so sort of three versions of the answer. If somebody's giving you a referral,
just they're referring a customer to you, somebody they know.
Yeah.
Traditionally, it's been 5 or 10%. They don't do anything other than supply a referral to the customer. Okay. If it's a channel partner, in other words, a partner who services the customer in some fashion, maybe does the installation and all the other stuff, that traditionally is in the range of 25 to 33.33%. If they do a lot of after service and they actually own the customer, you do relatively little work, it's higher, it can be 40%. So if you're selling or reselling business-to-business software in the enterprise market, quite often the reseller percentages are somewhere between 25 and 40%. Okay?
How about the situation where it's more than it's a referral that results in a sale? Could you structure on that basis?
So one of the things you should do, especially with your product, is understand if there will be customization or services associated with the product. And you're shaking your head, which isn't necessarily the best thing to do, because a lot of system integrators who will refer companies to you make all their money on customization and add-ons. So one of the things that you want is that quite often you can, there's a lot of big companies will say, we don't want a percentage of your product. If you sell it, we're really happy because we get to do all the installation and stuff and charge our guys out at $80 an hour while it's being installed, put into the network, and if there's customizations, because every big company wants reports that fit exactly their model, then the services revenue can be a lot higher than the actual cost of the product. And that's an incentive for the channel partner a lot of the time as well. Okay? Great. Okay, metrics and analytics. So there's a whole series of things that you can manage and you can monitor, and a whole things you can look at. So what's my average order size? And when early stage companies start out, we usually ask them, how long does it take from when you meet a customer for you to close? And you can say, okay, that's interesting. What's the average time to the first order? That's what it is. I meet a customer, how long does it take me to get the order? And especially in the business market or enterprise market, you'll often get, well, some guys buy within a couple months, others it takes over a year. And that means either they had budget already or they had to go through the budgeting process to get the money the second time. Okay? Or what's my customer lifetime value? And what that really means is that it'll cost me a certain amount of money to attract a customer. If they come back and buy from me repeatedly, the value of that customer is higher than somebody who just comes and buys once. So at the sailing school, I know that 40% of the customers will return and take a second course. So the lifetime value of those customers, at least in dollars, is higher than people who come once. Okay? So it's really important that I try to increase the rate at which people are really happy, see value, and are prepared to come back a second time. Can I put more leads into my sales pipeline? Can I improve my close rate? Are people, they talk to me, they also talk to 5 other vendors. Am I being selected? Yes or no? What's my revenue per salesperson or employee? What's the average revenue per employee for many companies or successful, companies that are trucking along, making a bit of money? What is that per year in Vancouver? Sorry? How much per employee? Per employee?
No, sorry, per salesperson is what I meant.
Okay, per salesperson it can be high. It can be, salespeople who sell $1 million worth of stuff are usually pretty good. But revenue per employee in a company, let's say you've got 10 employees, it's really hard to survive if you're not making $1 million a year. Okay, it's like $100,000 per year. Or if you have a very highly educated, highly paid workforce. So I know a company in town that does a lot of R&D, and they have over 100 people on staff with a PhD. Their cost per employee is almost $200,000 per year, because they're really highly paid people who've come from all over the world to work for them. Okay, so you can measure all sorts of different things. One of the best case studies to read about this, if you can read anything about them, is a company called Beyond the Rack. Who's heard of Beyond the Rack? Okay. So it's an online clothing retailer. And one of the things they're really aware of is how much does it cost for me to find a new customer, because I have to advertise on the internet. And then what's that lifetime value of the customer to me? How many times will they order? What's the average dollar per order? And how will I go back to my cohort of past purchases and try to get them to come back and buy from me again? Something they spend a lot of time on. One of the things I will say, though, is that it's really important to understand there's a whole bunch of things you can measure that don't mean anything. They're just not that important. So web traffic, unique visitors to your website, how often do they come back? How many subscribers or users do I have? Everybody above the line could be doing all sorts of stuff on my website and never paying me money. Okay, it's nice, but it's called vanity metrics. It may not help you with anything. So I showed you earlier on at the sailing school, we did a promotion with Living Social. We did a Groupon coupon. One of the things we did last year was we also figured out that it didn't cost a lot of money to do a promotional coupon on Facebook. And we thought, wow, this is cool. We'll put out this thing and people can get a discount on taking a lesson or whatever else they're going to do. And we put it out, and one day 10,000 people came and looked at that. And like, so 10,000 people, like unique visitors to our Facebook site. Oh, this is great. And within a month, I worked it out. We had one person phoned us up. Like, it just didn't mean anything. They went and looked, and that's all they did. Like, none of them came and took lessons. It was nice, but it had no real impact on the business.
Yeah. Above the line, what about with regards to CPM for ads or anything else like that?
Right. So if you have CPM, then if you're you're paying money to get people to come to your website, you'd hope that they're actually going to be converting into a paying customer. All right. So you could be, I heard somebody today say that in some areas they're paying per click $1.50, and in some special words, in some case, $4.50. I hope those people are converting into paying customers, because that's a lot of money. So if I get 10,000 clicks today, it just cost me 45 grand. I hope I get it back. Okay, it's really important to understand that. What's my churn? I mean, so cell phone companies in Canada have a higher churn rate than they did before. What's one thing that's increased the churn rate in the last couple of years? Sorry? Yes, number transferability has all of a sudden allowed us to get, oh, I hate these guys, I'm going somewhere else. And then you hate them, and then you got to move to another one. Okay, so there's a whole series of things that go into churn. Like the drop-off rate is great. So just as a quick example, we'll look at one website here. Who's seen this one before? You guys have seen this? Yeah. Deanie's seen this. I do this every year. Okay. So what is this?
Resume.
It's a resume. What does it look like? Yeah. So it's an Amazon knockoff. It's pretty good, though. It's product details, all this sort of stuff. It's interesting. Skills rank. He's done all sorts of stuff. He's got the 5 out of 5 stars, everything. So it's a really cute way of doing things. So it's a guy who was looking for a job, so he put his resume online and stuck it up as an Amazon knockoff. And in December of 2012, he was in the top 2,000 websites in the world. He had more, it went viral because people found it cute. So he had more web traffic than some small countries. So you look at it, and he's got cool things like he's got 42,000 likes on Facebook. And he's got really interesting, and so I finally got the job. And after 2 months and 1.5 million visitors, I've got the job. Where's the stuff where he explains? Oh, here we are. Thank you. More info here. And he actually put his analytics on the website. So he's working in New York for Birchbox. Here you are. A few stats and figures. So remember, he wanted a job, and it took him 3 months, and he had 1.5 million web visitors. Over 1 million of those people were probably pretty useless to him, right? So he had a whole bunch of traffic that didn't help him at all. So what am I actually going to get out of it is he got over 1,000 emails, lots of Facebook likes. He wanted to work in the United States. It's not said here. So top web refers. The guys from, interesting stuff. Interesting that it's more Yahoo than anything else. It was intriguing. Top 10 visiting countries. So he wants to work in the US, so 64% of his traffic is useless. Unless somebody's on vacation and happens to be in the UK. All right, so there's a whole series of things, and you look at it and say, I can create a whole bunch of buzz and a whole bunch of traffic to actually get what I want. That's the key. That's really the message I'm trying to create here. So one of the things you want to do is measure everything, especially web traffic, then measure the conversion rates. Does it translate into reality and translate into the real things that I actually want to have happen? Is that something that's going to work for me? Does the web traffic help him? It did eventually help him. I think it's good. And he still gets lots of Facebook likes. The numbers keep going up. Okay? So I mentioned this earlier on. One of the key components is social media creates inbound marketing. All right? I go out and I create visibility and stuff, and I measure people who come to my website to find stuff. That's different than outbound marketing, where I send out emails or I send even letters and stuff. A combination of the two are really good. The three tools that we like really well are HubSpot, Hootsuite, and Kissmetrics. If I had to pick one, it would be Hootsuite, but HubSpot is a really close second for measuring what you do. And it's not expensive to have the stuff to measure your web traffic and understand everything that happens. So one of the things you want to do is measure your product so you can collect metrics. And at the end of the day, you're trying to understand, what does it cost me to get a customer? And what's the lifetime value of that customer? How much money do I get from that customer? So if we had more time, one of the things I do quite often is I pull up Salesforce.com's website. And Salesforce has on it really neat videos about how to do all sorts of different things. And in order to watch one of the videos, you have to register. So I'm registered in their system. And if I showed you one of the videos today, Salesforce.com would tell you that I came inbound, looked at their website, and played a video. I would get an email within 5 minutes and a phone call within 10 minutes from the sales rep. So I come inbound, I look at something on their website, they go outbound and contact me. So good companies figure out, and then I would tell them, like last time I did it, I was teaching at SFU in a business class, and I said, I put the guy on speaker. I said, here, I'm a bunch of the business students. They're not customers. Hopefully they will be one time. And he was great. Thank you. So he didn't call me again. All right. But so they classify you right away. Are you a sales lead? Yes or no? Which is exactly what you want too. I'm not a sales lead. We had a pleasant conversation. That's great. Okay. So in closing, there's a series of books. And one of the key things you want to do is go from first customer to first market. You want users and revenue. And you want to be really targeted with who you market. And in order to get there, you back out who your target customer is and make sure your product fits the market. So a series of books that are good. I really like the one on the far right. It's Steve Blank's latest book, The Startup Owner's Manual. It's really good. It's a little bit cookbookish, and that actually fits quite well. And he gives a lot of really good examples of things that you can do. And if I was to go and sign on for, maybe I'll hold it then. If I was going to sign on for an online newsletter or email setup, I would go to HubSpot. A lot of the stuff that HubSpot has in terms of how to market online and their e-newsletters and stuff is some of the best things you can get. And that's everything, folks. If there's any questions, I can do them as a group, or if you want to talk one-on-one, happy to be here afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you.